You've been sold the myth 1,000 different ways. Navy SEALs as the final form of the modern warrior, the men who step off helicopters into darkness, who operate in the places most people can't point to on a map, who set the gold standard for special operations. And then there's the story nobody likes to tell on camera. Not because it makes the SEALs look weak, nothing in this story makes them weak, but because it exposes a truth the military learned the hard way in 1969. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can encounter isn't the enemy. Sometimes it's an ally who fights a different war inside the same jungle. 47 SEALs went into a joint series of operations in the Rung Sat Special Zone. All 47 came out, but when the rotation ended, only 19 volunteered to work with the Australian SAS again. The other 28 requested immediate reassignment, not out of fear of the Viet Cong, but out of discomfort. One SEAL lieutenant submitted a report that vanished into a classified archive. The opening line survived only in whispers. "We thought they were joking when they said they'd been in position for 6 days. Then they found the evidence. After that, the laughter died. Because the Australians weren't playing the same game. They didn't just move through the jungle, they became it. And when the jungle demanded payment, they paid it in a currency that made hardened commandos go pale, vomit behind palm trunks, and in one case break down in tears and refuse to go back out, saying, 'I can't become what they are.' This is the story of that joint operation, and the demonstration that followed, an exchange that ended early, 2 officers sent for psychiatric evaluation, and a classified directive stating American personnel would not attempt to replicate certain Australian underground clearance techniques under any circumstances. Not because the Pentagon feared those methods wouldn't work, but because they feared they would, and feared what they would do to the men who learned them. Rung Sat Special Zone, South Vietnam, October 3rd, 1969, 0030 hours. The darkness wasn't normal darkness, it was the kind that swallowed distance and depth until the world became a flat, suffocating wall. No horizon, no relief, just wet air and the constant suggestion that something was watching from inches away. Lieutenant Evan Mercer of SEAL Team 2 knew this place. Mangroves, black water, mud that tugged at your boots like a living thing, vegetation that stank of rot and salt and old death. He'd spent 8 months learning how to fight inside it. Tonight he would learn the difference between fighting in the jungle and operating as the jungle. The Australians were waiting at the dock, their silhouettes spare and wrong-looking in the weak red light. 4 men, lean, still. Their patrol leader had a face like a worn knife and a posture that made him look half-starved, like he'd forgotten eating was a human requirement. Someone had told Mercer his call sign was Scarecrow, and the name fit too well. Scarecrow didn't greet Mercer like a brother in arms. He looked at him the way a butcher looks at meat, not cruel, just assessing. The briefing was simple. 2 blacked-out boats up the channels, 3 kilometers inland, observation on a suspected supply route, 72 hours of eyes and ears, no contact unless compromised, then extraction. Standard reconnaissance. Mercer had done it so many times he could have recited it in his sleep. What unsettled him was the preparation. His SEALs loaded Stoner 63s, M16 with grenade launchers, extra magazines, grenades, smoke, demolitions, radios, everything they might need if the swamp turned into a gunfight. Each man carried enough weight to sink a canoe. They looked like a walking arsenal. The Australians looked like they'd lost a bet. Single rifles, minimal webbing, a small pack each. Half empty, like they didn't believe in the future. No grenades visible, no heavy weapons, no long radio antennas swaying like flags. Mercer watched Scarecrow pull items from his pack and set them aside on the dock as if they were trash. A first aid kit reduced to almost nothing, rations cut down again and again, a spare shirt tossed away, socks left behind entirely. Mercer stepped close, trying to sound casual. "Sergeant, you're light." Scarecrow didn't look up. "I'm correct." "You're going out for 3 days," Mercer said. "You're carrying 200 rounds. Scarecrow paused, then raised his eyes. Blank, not aggressive, worse than aggressive. "If I fire 200 rounds, he said quietly, "I've already done the mission wrong." Mercer let out a short laugh. "Right, because you're not here to fight." Scarecrow's mouth didn't move. "We're here to watch." "And when Charlie finds you?" Scarecrow stared past Mercer as if he were translucent. "He won't." "Why?" "Because we'll know he's coming before he does." "And if he does find you?" Scarecrow's voice stayed flat, almost bored. "Then we choose whether he lives." It sounded like bravado. It sounded like theater. It sounded like a man trying to impress Americans who'd flown halfway around the world to be legends. Mercer decided he'd humor it. Then the boat slid into the mangroves and the swamp closed behind them like a mouth. At 0200, the Zodiac engines purred under mufflers and the black water became a corridor between walls of roots. The SEALs moved like a trained machine, spacing right, weapons ready, eyes scanning with night vision, hand signals crisp. Mercer felt the familiar comfort of competence. The Australians moved differently. They didn't scan, they didn't fidget, they didn't hurry. They moved at a pace that felt insultingly slow, like a patrol in training, except their slowness had weight to it, intention, control. Every few steps Scarecrow stopped, not a crouch or a knee or a security halt like the manual said. He simply stopped, upright and motionless, 30 seconds, sometimes a minute, then moved again. Mercer couldn't read it. After 400 meters, Mercer keyed his radio to check spacing, and the click sounded like a gunshot in his own ears. Scarecrow's hand closed over the radio like a clamp. No words, just a slow shake of the head and a slicing gesture across his throat. No radio. He pulled pulled out a waterproof notepad and wrote in tiny letters, "Radio only if extraction is life or death. Sound carries. Swamp repeats it." Mercer wanted to argue. The radios were encrypted, secure, but Scarecrow's eyes held him like a vice. Mercer nodded, and the radio went silent. 3 hours into the movement, Mercer felt something he hated: doubt. They'd covered barely 2 kilometers. His men were getting frustrated. Rodriguez leaned close. "This is ridiculous, sir." Mercer shot him a look that said, "Shut it down," but inside he agreed. Then, just before dawn, the swamp taught him a lesson. Scarecrow froze. Not his normal stop and listen. His entire body went rigid with one foot still in the air, perfectly balanced like a heron. He held it for 2 minutes. Mercer watched as Scarecrow lowered the raised foot in increments so small they looked imaginary without letting it touch down, then shifted backward, reversed his step, and signaled the patrol flat. Prone. Mercer sank into mud. Mosquitoes found skin like needles through fabric. They waited. 5 minutes. 10. Mercer heard nothing but swamp. Water sucking, insects whining, distant birds. Then so faint he almost dismissed it. Tap tap, wood against wood. Low Vietnamese voices, relaxed. Mercer's pulse jumped. 20 meters away, barely visible in the newborn gray light, a sampan slid through the channel. 4 Viet Cong, weapons slung, talking like men who believed the jungle belonged to them. They passed close enough Mercer could have spat into the boat. The seals didn't breathe. The Australians didn't exist. They weren't hiding. They were gone. The sampan drifted on. Only after another 10 minutes did Scarecrow raise his head and signal movement. Later, at a halt, Mercer crawled to him and whispered, "How did you know?" Scarecrow's eyes stayed far away. "The birds," he said. Mercer blinked. "The birds?" One stopped singing. East, then another closer. Something was moving under the canopy. I didn't know what until I heard the wood. Mercer stared. He'd been trained to listen for boots and voices and metal. No one had ever taught him to listen to the jungle as if it were a living alarm system. In that pocket of mangroves, Mercer understood something that tasted like humiliation. He knew how to fight in the jungle, but he did not know how to belong there. They reached the observation site at 1,000, a 3-kilometer movement that took 8 hours. By SEAL standards, embarrassing. By Scarecrow standards, correct. The position overlooked a trail intersection intelligence said pulsed every 3 or 4 days. Mercer expected digging, fields of fire, perimeter plans. Instead, the Australians began to disappear. One slid into a hollow log, becoming shadow inside shadow. Another folded beneath exposed mangrove roots, his body twisted into a natural gap like it had grown there. Scarecrow lay in a shallow depression filled with dead leaves and began to bury himself with his hands, pulling debris over his body until only eyes and a rifle barrel remained. Then the 4th man, Dingo, did something that made Mercer's medic gag. He stripped to his underwear, smeared black mud over his skin like paint, thick and stinking and heavy, then pulled his uniform back on over the mud. The smell hit like a wave, rot, sulfur, stagnant water. Dingo noticed the reaction and whispered, almost amused, "Smell is first. Humans smell like humans. Soap, toothpaste, oil, clean cloth. Wind's right, they'll smell you from 100. He tapped his chest. "This smells like swamp." He smiled, teeth dull. "Welcome." The SEALs built their hide with professional discipline, concealment, overlapping sectors, watch rotation, textbook, and yet within 30 minutes, Mercer couldn't locate 3 of the 4 Australians even when he knew where they were. It was like watching a different species. The SEALs whispered, ate small rations, checked weapons. The Australians didn't move. Mercer watched Scarecrow for hours and saw no shift, no adjustment, no visible breath. For a while, he wondered if the man had died under the leaf litter. He signaled Rodriguez to crawl over and confirm. Rodriguez took 20 minutes to cross 15 meters. He reached the leaf depression and lifted a hand, and Scarecrow's arm snapped out and clamped his wrist. Rodriguez flinched so hard he nearly yelped. Scarecrow leaned his head a fraction and whispered, "Don't." Rodriguez crawled back, shaking. "Sir," he whispered, pale, "that dude's not human. He watched me the whole way. Let me get that close on purpose." Mercer said nothing because he believed him. On the second day, the Viet Cong came. Not a patrol, a company. 40 or 50 men moving with confidence, real scanning, weapons ready. Mercer felt every SEAL turn into coiled wire. This was a target-rich dream. They could call gunships, drop ordnance, erase a unit from the map. Scarecrow's hand emerged from leaves and signaled, "No, watch." Mercer's throat tightened. This felt wrong, but he held the line. The enemy passed within 30 meters, close enough to see faces, hear murmured jokes, smell cigarette smoke. The SEALs did nothing. The Australians recorded everything. Tiny camera, waterproof sketches, counts, details, like scientists observing predators. The company moved on and the jungle exhaled. Mercer was confused, impressed, angry. In his world, you find them, you kill them. That's the job. 6 hours later, he learned why Scarecrow waited. Another group appeared, smaller, 8 men bent under loads, supply carriers. Behind them walked an NVA officer in a pressed uniform with visible rank. Arrogance you could see even at distance. A high-value target. Scarecrow signaled, "This one." The Australians shifted in tiny movements to perfect angles. The officer drew closer, 20 meters, unaware. Scarecrow fired once. The rifle cracked, and the officer dropped like his strings were cut. 2 bodyguards spun. Dingo fired twice. They fell. 3 seconds, 3 dead, clean and surgical. Then the Australians did something that made Mercer's blood run cold. They didn't chase porters. They didn't call it in. They didn't immediately search bodies. Scarecrow stood, walked to the officer, and arranged him. Sat upright against a tree, hat adjusted, arms crossed, almost like he was resting. Then Scarecrow tucked a playing card into the officer's collar, a joker. He arranged the bodyguards too, with intent. It wasn't mutilation. It wasn't gore. It was theater, a message written in corpses. Mercer felt something inside him recoil. SEALs killed efficiently and professionally, but they didn't compose the dead. Scarecrow returned to the leaves and vanished like nothing happened. 2 hours later, a recovery team arrived. Mercer watched as the Viet Cong found the tableau. They froze, stared. One vomited. Another began shouting, voice high with fear, pointing at the card like it was a curse. They grabbed bodies fast, frantic, eyes darting into the trees. They didn't search. They didn't track. They ran. Scarecrow allowed himself the smallest smile. Mercer understood the tactic and hated that he understood. 3 killed was a statistic. 3 killed like this was a story that would spread and multiply. Stories travel faster than bullets. By tomorrow it would be 10 dead. By next week 20. By next month the jungle itself would be haunted. Fear is a weapon that reloads itself. Extraction came at dusk on the 3rd day, the same slow movement, the same discipline. The SEALs were exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. 3 days of tension. The Australians looked almost unchanged. On the boat ride back, Mercer sat beside Scarecrow and finally asked, "Why the card?" Scarecrow didn't look at him. "Killing removes 3 men from the war for a day," he said. "Fear removes hundreds for weeks." Mercer swallowed. "You think they'll believe ghosts?" Scarecrow's voice stayed flat. "They'll believe whatever keeps them alive. That's how men work." He finally turned, eyes ancient. "We don't have your numbers. We don't have your air. We don't have the luxury of fighting loud, so we fight in their heads." Mercer stared down at his hands and understood why men would request reassignment after working with these allies. Not because the Australians were cowards, but because they were willing to become something Americans still flinched away from. Mercer thought the lesson ended there. He was wrong. 3 weeks later, he was invited to a joint training evolution that would crack his understanding of special operations open. A classified exchange in the Philippines, later whispered about as the demonstration. It was supposed to be mutual learning. It ended in 3 days. 2 officers sent for psychiatric evaluation, and a memo stating Australian methods produced results at psychological costs that might be unacceptable for American personnel. The SEAL demonstrations were flawless. Beach assault, breach charges, room clearing like choreography. Fast, loud, decisive. The Australians observed quietly, asked about timing and equipment, took notes. Then they went into the ocean, 3 kilometers offshore at night, no boat, no visible support. They slipped under and vanished. Hours passed, and then they rose out of the surf directly in front of the target building like something the sea had returned. They crossed the beach faster than the SEALs had, silent as tide water. No explosive breach, just picks. A door opening with a soft click. Then the team flowed inside like smoke. Suppressed shots sounded like someone closing a book. 12 seconds later, Scarecrow's voice came over the radio. Objective clear, 4 down, no friendlies, structure intact. SEALs stared at each other because for the first time in their lives, their own assault looked clumsy. Captain Halverson walked down to the beach, incredulous. "That swim, how far can you do it?" Scarecrow shrugged. "Depends. Longest?" 7 clicks, Scarecrow said, as if describing a jog. Someone laughed in disbelief. No scuba, no tanks, no surface breaks. Scarecrow saw it on their faces. "It's not magic," he said. "It's breath control. You slow the heart. You stop fighting the water." A SEAL instructor asked what nobody wanted to ask. "So you're comfortable drowning?" Scarecrow looked at him. "I'm comfortable dying," he said. "Drowning is just one way it happens." Silence. Because there are things you can train your body to do and things you have to train your mind to accept. Day 2 was tunnels, a mock-up of Kukai, tight passages and blind corners. The SEALs went first with flashlights and pistols, methodical clearing. 45 minutes to clear 60 meters. Professional. Safe. Then the Australians stepped to the hatch with knives and darkness. Dingo explained, "Light makes you a target. In tunnels, they know every inch. A flashlight blinds you outside the beam." Halverson tried to object, but the Australians were already descending. The hatch shut. 18 minutes passed. No sound. No radio. Then the exit opened and 4 Australians emerged filthy, breathing hard, eyes calm. Scarecrow keyed the radio. "Tunnel clear. Time 18. Halverson stared. "How?" Scarecrow removed his gloves. His hands were raw, thin lines of blood. "You feel the walls," he said. "You map it. You listen to the echo. You smell airflow." Dingo added softly, "Sometimes you smell them. Fish sauce, rice, breath, fear." A younger SEAL spoke with a trembling voice. "That's not soldiering. That's not human." The room went dead quiet. Scarecrow looked at the young man, and for the first time, Mercer saw emotion in his eyes. Not anger, pity. "You're right," Scarecrow said quietly. "It isn't human. In tunnels, humanity gets you killed." Then he walked out. Outside, Mercer found him on steps, smoking choking, hands trembling slightly, the first crack in the mask. Mercer tried to smooth it over, but Scarecrow cut him off with a tired exhale. "He meant it," Scarecrow said, "and he's correct." He stared out at the sea. "You Americans think skill is the cost. Training is the price. The price is what it turns you into. They break you down. They build you back. They make a predator. And predators don't fit back into normal life." His voice softened. "I dream about home. Sheep station, fences, normal work. In the dream, I can't remember how. I only remember hunting." Mercer felt cold despite the tropical air because he finally understood why so many SEALs requested reassignment. It wasn't about ego. It was about seeing the end of a road and being afraid of what they might become if they kept walking. The Australians were farther down it. Day 3 was hostage rescue in a mock village. The SEALs executed perfectly. Breach, clear, neutralize, extract in under 3 minutes. Textbook. Then the Australians watched the building for 2 hours, mapped patterns, listened for creaks, learned habits. Then they sent one man, Dingo. He climbed the outer wall without a ladder, fingertips finding holds that seemed imaginary. Inside, cameras caught something the SEALs struggled to process. Dingo moved so slowly the eye didn't register him, passed within inches of role players, waited for the exact moment, simulated 2 knife kills so realistic the role players later admitted they thought they might die, moved hostages out with almost no noise, and walked them out the front door while the rest of his team created a diversion elsewhere. Total time 53 minutes, enemy casualties 2, hostages safe, noise nearly none. Perfect and sickening to watch, because it wasn't bravery, it was surgery. Halverson stopped the exercise and demanded an explanation, calling it reckless, one man with no redundancy. Scarecrow calmly replied, "It wasn't luck, it was calculation. 2 hours of observation, memorized routes, memorized sound, no margin because they removed chance through preparation." Halverson argued American doctrine demanded overmatch and backups. Scarecrow answered that loud victories wake the whole area, draw reinforcements, turn extraction into a fight, while quiet victories leave the enemy confused so you can do it again tomorrow. Mercer watched and realized both were right. Both philosophies worked, and they couldn't be merged. That night, Mercer found Dingo on the beach and asked if he'd been scared going in alone. Dingo said he was terrified every time, but fear was information, not a commander. Training told you what to do. Mercer asked why choose the hardest way. Dingo said because Australia was small. They couldn't afford to fight fair, couldn't outgun or outnumber anyone, so one of them had to be worth 10. "You're elite because your country can afford to make you elite," he told Mercer. "We're elite because we have no choice." The next morning, the exchange ended. Official reason, scheduling conflicts, real reason, classified. 28 SEALs requested reassignment. 2 officers sought psychiatric evaluation after nightmares about darkness and tunnels. Rodriguez broke down in debriefing, saying he couldn't become that, couldn't be good at this if it meant losing himself. But 19 SEALs, Mercer among them, requested extended cross-training with the Australians. Every request was denied. Officially, integration concerns. Unofficially, the Navy didn't want its men coming back changed. They wanted warriors, not men who learned how to fight in absolute darkness and live with the transformation that required. Mercer wrote a report that circulated quietly in sealed folders for years. America had resources, budgets, air support, numbers, but pure results per man, operational efficiency, sometimes belonged to those who didn't have luxury. Over the following years, pieces of Australian methodology appeared in SEAL training. Sanitized, tracking, patience, observation, aspects of combat swimming, not the theater, not the darkness, not the part where you pin a card to a corpse and let fear do the killing for you. The Australians returned to Vietnam and kept operating, building reputations that sounded like folklore. Provinces went quiet when they arrived. Units avoided them. Men whispered about ghosts in mangroves. Mercer completed his tour and came home, built a career, medals, promotions, a normal life with normal responsibilities. But he never forgot 3 weeks in 1969. Decades later, in an oral history interview, he was asked what he remembered most about working with the Australian SAS. Mercer was silent a long time, then said softly, "We laughed when they said they'd been in position 6 days. He swallowed. Then we saw the way they moved, the way they listened, the way they disappeared. He looked down at his hands, older now, human hands that had held children and tools instead of rifles. And we realized we weren't looking at soldiers," he said. "Not anymore." When asked if he wished he trained longer, Mercer gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Part of me wishes I'd learned everything," he admitted. "Part of me is grateful I didn't, because I gotta come home and stay human. The Australians I met, most of them didn't manage that." He leaned forward, voice quiet but final. "And that's the lesson nobody puts in recruitment videos. The question isn't whether you can become that good. The question is whether you're willing to pay what it costs." Because in the mangroves of Vietnam, in the tunnels of Kuk Kai, and on a beach in the Philippines, the SEALs learned something that never leaves you once you've seen it. There's always a deeper level, always a higher standard, always another price. And sometimes the most frightening thing isn't the enemy in front of you. It's the version of yourself you might have to become to win.